Hello and welcome to my tutorial. Mr.NET is here, and today I'm going to talk about the mock class, which is placed in the mock module from the unit test. This class allows us to create mock objects and modify that object so that we can test our classes, functions and properties with our unit tests. For that I create this little script here called mock_script1, and I also create a unit test with Visual Studio, and with this unit test I show you some examples how we can use the mock object and the parameters from the mock object. I import my script as script, and I also import the mock module in unit tests. The first parameter what I want to show is the spec parameter. This parameter is used to tell that the mock object sets in the underline class property the instance of the given attribute or of the given argument. For example, I have here a function check is instance, and this function takes one argument, and if the argument is an instance of this class, this function returns true. Otherwise I get an exception. So in the first test I create a simple mock object calls mock object, and I also create a real object, and this is an instance from the class 1. So if I use a assertion, assert is instance, and say the real object is an instance of this class, this test here second chance. Yes, this test is okay. If I try to compare the mock object and run my test, we see that the mock object is not an instance of the class 1. So to prepare the mock object that it is an instance of this class, we can use this spec parameter and say that this parameter is a class 1 object. Now if I start the test, it is okay. The next parameter is the spec_set parameter. This parameter can also be used to say that the mock object is an instance of this class. If I test it, it also works fine. But there are a difference between the spec and the spec_set parameter. For that I copy this line and I create a second mock object. The first mock object has the spec argument and the second mock object has the spec _set argument. The class has an attribute called value. That's a class property, and I can here say mock object dot value is 10. This is also possible for the second mock object. But when I try to set a new value into the mocking object called number is 10, the mock object with the spec argument will accept this, but the mock object with the spec set argument is strict. This object doesn't accept new specification from this instance, so I can't set here a new property called number. We see mock object has no attribute number in this line. If you use both arguments and say the spec argument is class 2 and the spec _set argument is class 1, internally the spec set argument overrides this argument when this argument is not none. So this priority is higher than this priority. We can compare it. I compare the second mock object, and the instance of the mock object would be this class. Yes. The next parameter is the return value. I can define for my mocking object return values when the mocking object is called by a function, for example. For that, I create a new assertion assert true and call in my script the method check instances. This method takes 3 arguments. For that I create a dirt object object 2 and I give the method this object as arguments. And the last argument is the mock object, and we see that the mock object is not an instance of this class. So this function calls these functions which checks if the argument is an instance of the class. So when I called this test, I get this exception. That's not a class 1. This is because the mock object is not an instance of this class. So I define in my script the function check instance that this function is a own mock object. And I give the mock object a new return value, return underline return underline value is true. So every time this function is called, it returns true. So if I start the test, it works. The next argument is the side effect argument. The side effect argument can be a list, an exception, or a function. For example, if I want to throw this exception, I can give this method a class which is not an instance from class 1. But for example, I didn't have this object. I create a new real object number 3. Real underline object. And give it this function as a dirt argument. When I start the test, it is okay, because every of this argument is an instance of class 1. To throw the exception, I need one object that isn't the instance of this class. So I create a mock object that is also the function check is instance. So this instance, and I say sometimes it returns false. And for that I can use the side effect, side underline effect. The side effect is every times invoked if the mock object is called. And if you define the side effect as a list, the side effect returns like a generator the next value in the list. What does that mean? I mean that the first invoke of this function returns true. The second invoke of this function returns also true, but the third invoke of this function returns false. So now, if I start the test, I get an exception, because in this if case I return false from this function. I can show you this with an else and throw another exception. I am an exception. So I've saved this and I start the unit test. We see I am an exception. So That's the first case with the side effect. The second case is you can also write in this list an exception. That's also possible. So now if I start the test, the side effect returns another exception, and that's not this exception and also this exception. That's this exception. The side effect can also be a function. So I can define here an inner function called function, and this, when the side effect is a function, the function takes the same arguments like the mock object. So the mock object is this function check is instance, and this function takes 3 arguments. So also this function gets 3 arguments, and I can do what I want in this function. I can return every time true. Define here the function. Now I can also start this test. Oh, yes, of course. It is not this function, it is this function, and this function has only 1 argument. Yes, now it works. If this function has a return value, this return value overrides the default return value. Return underline value is default. The mock object mock.default has a default return value called default. But this function overrides this default value. So you can't use side effect with a function with return value and then you override your default return value. Well, side effect. So the next argument is the name argument. This argument can be used to give the mock object a name. Mock object. That's useful maybe for debugging. If I start the debugger, we see that the mock gets a name mock object. So you can declare more mock objects. The last argument in this video is the unsafe argument. Our mock objects can't have arguments that starts with assert or as read. The as read and the assert in argument names will throw attribute error. but Visual Studio wraps this failure, so I have to show it with the debugger. So I start the debugger. Okay, I didn't save it. I repeat it. Yes. Now we get here a traceback, and here also in this attribute name a traceback. And now I can use the unsafe argument. Unsafe is true. And if I start the debugger now, we see it is allowed to use the name assert and asret. Yes, that's a mock object asret A and a mock object asret B. So for that we can use the unsafe argument, because the mock object has some properties which start with assert and asret, so better we didn't use it, but it is your choice. The argument dictionary I show in the next videos, and for this argument, the wraps argument, I didn't find any case which I can use it or what this attribute is doing. So maybe if you know for what I can use this attribute, please write this into the comments. And if you like this video, please give me a feedback and subscribe my channel, and hopefully I see you in the next video. Bye.